Heading West by Tammy Zambo. The Louisiana Purchase. Before 1804, the United States was made up of 17 states east of the Mississippi River. In 1804, President Thomas Jefferson sent Meriwether Lewis and William Clark to explore new United States territory. This territory stretched west of the Mississippi and was called the Louisiana Purchase. Americans closely followed news of Lewis and Clark's journey. Soon, many of them wanted to learn about the West for themselves. A few men became beaver trappers in the West. They became known as mountain men, and some of them grew famous. As they searched for beavers for the fur trade, they also explored and charted trails. These were the trails that other Americans followed as they moved west. Early pioneers. By 1840, the beaver population had declined, and some of the mountain men returned to the east. Other mountain men guided pioneers to California or Oregon Territory. In the 1840s, United States territory grew to include what are now the states of Texas, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, California, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, and Utah. Easterners wanted to see these regions. More and more Americans began heading west. On the trail. Families traveled west in the spring from Nebraska or Missouri in groups called caravans. Each family had a covered wagon, which was usually pulled by oxen. They carried only basic supplies. Several trails took them to California or the Northwest. Another trail took them to the Southwest. Most pioneers, including children, walked beside their wagon every day. Their cows gave fresh milk. A churn attached to the wagon made butter as the wagon bumped along. The 2,000-mile journey was difficult. The trip to Oregon Territory took about 5 months. Pioneers faced bad weather and poor trail conditions, along with illness. Graves could be seen along every trail. The Gold Rush. In January 1848, a California construction worker spotted a small nugget of gold on the ground. Word spread quickly, and the gold rush was on. Soon people from California, the East, and all over the world began to search for gold. Many of them came in 1849, earning them the name 49ers. California cities were soon home to many people. There were European Americans, African Americans, both enslaved and free, and Native Americans. They came from the East Coast, China, Germany, Ireland, Russia, Italy, the West Indies, and Australia. Less than 10% of them were women. Making a living. Most people traveled to California by crossing the land in covered wagons. Another route, by sea, went around the tip of South America. Still another sea route went through Panama. It was shorter, but involved crossing the land by mule and canoe. At first, miners searched for gold near the surface of the soil with just a pick, shovel, or pan. By 1852, investors had set up mining companies. Now heavy machinery drilled deep shafts into the ground or blasted into hillsides. Some 49ers worked for the new mining companies. Others headed home, searching for gold along the way. Some found gold deposits in present-day Colorado. The city of Denver sprang up as a result. Gold was also found in areas that are now Montana, Oregon, New Mexico, Arizona, and Nevada. Building businesses. Some of the people who moved to California set up businesses to serve the miners. One of these entrepreneurs built a store right next to the sawmill where the first gold was found. Other businessmen opened laundries or restaurants. Women worked as entertainers, provided domestic services, or operated boarding houses. A few entrepreneurs became famous and wealthy. Levi Strauss made the world's first blue jeans, sturdy pants that were good for miners. Philip Armour ran a meat market. He later built a meat-packing empire in Chicago, Illinois. John Studebaker made wheelbarrows. His family's Indiana business later made wagons and automobiles. Henry Wells and William Fargo established banks and transported gold during the gold rush. The Pony Express. 49ers wanted news and letters from the East, but mail could take months to arrive. The immigrants began to demand faster service. 3 entrepreneurs named William Russell, Alexander Majors, and William Waddell were already hauling supplies to settlers and military posts across the West. They had the idea of setting up a business to carry the mail by horse over a 2,000-mile route in 10 days or less. The service, known as the Pony Express, began on April 3, 1860. Its 80 riders were men and boys who weighed between 100 and 120 pounds and knew the frontier well. Each carried a mail bag over his saddle. The mail, printed on thin tissue paper, weighed less than 10 pounds. Mail in motion. Each Pony Express rider covered between 75 and 100 miles between stations. Horses were changed every 10 to 15 miles. Sometimes a rider would arrive at a station only to find that no rider was there to relieve him. When this happened, the rider and sometimes the same horse would ride on to the next station. The arrival of the telegraph. The Pony Express operated for just 18 months before the telegraph put it out of business. This technology, already used in the East, sent messages electrically along wires in just minutes. On October 24, 1861, the extension of telegraph lines to the West Coast was completed. 2 days later, California newspapers noted that our little friend the pony is to run no more. The long drive. Even before people began heading to the far west, thousands built cattle ranches on the wide-open lands of Texas. Ranchers, however, raised so many cattle that they needed new markets. The California Gold Rush was a good opportunity for Texas ranchers. During the 1850s, more than 100,000 cattle were driven in herds from Texas to San Francisco. The peak of cattle driving came after the Civil War, as railroads began branching further west. Cattle were now driven north from Texas to towns in Missouri and Kansas. From there, they were shipped by rail to Chicago, Illinois. A cattle drive was usually led by a trail boss and 8 to 10 cowboys for a herd of between 2,000 and 3,000 cattle. A cook drove the chuck wagon. A wrangler took care of the cowboys' horses. Most cowboys were European American, but some were Mexican and African American. Cowboys had to keep the cattle calm and headed in the right direction. This could be difficult because the cattle could stampede at the slightest sound or unexpected movement. Cowboys broke up stampedes and tracked down strays. They also took turns keeping watch through the night, singing to keep the cattle settled. It took months on the trail to reach their destination. A changing way of life. Between 1865 and 1890, about 10 million cattle were driven north from Texas. Gradually, though, open grazing lands were fenced off. Ranchers spread north into the prairies of Nebraska, North and South Dakota, Wyoming, and Montana. Cattle drives shortened to just a few days, but winters up north were snowy and cold. Cowboys had to find grazing areas where the wind had blown away the snow. They also had to chop holes in the ice so the cattle could get water to drink. Sunlight on the snow blinded them and caused the cowboys to get sunburned. Frost cracked their lips and skin. The best days of the cowboy were over. The Transcontinental Railroad. Settlers in the West wanted a transcontinental railroad to be extended to the West Coast. Congress authorized the railroad in 1862. Two companies raced to build it from opposite ends of the country. The Union Pacific worked westward from Omaha, Nebraska. The Central Pacific worked eastward from Sacramento, California. Union Pacific workers were mostly immigrants from Ireland, but some were former Confederate soldiers, Mexicans, Germans, English, and former enslaved people. As they worked, they were sometimes attacked by Native Americans who controlled the land. Thousands of Central Pacific workers were Chinese who had tried looking for gold in California. They had to blast tunnels through mountains, which was a dangerous job. Joining the tracks. Planners did not know where the two railroad lines would join. The competing teams of men who prepared the ground for the track even passed each other. The two lines were finally connected on May 10, 1869, at Promontory Point, Utah Territory. Homesteading. In 1862, Congress passed the Homestead Act. This act promised 160 acres of land to any person who claimed a plot or a homestead on the Great Plains and farmed it for 5 years. The act set off a new wave of pioneers, this time to the Midwest. Nearly 2 million people moved to the plains in the 1870s. They built their houses out of sod and plowed fields. They dug wells or walked to nearby streams for water. They hoped for good weather to grow crops. When grasshoppers or hail or drought destroyed the crops, they started over. They cared for each other when they were sick or in need. They did everything they could to survive.